How much is it worth to slow the loss of your personality? Hi, I'm Scott Ott with Bill Whittle and Stephen Green. This episode of Right Angle brought to you by the members at BillWhittle.com. And gentlemen, there's been a lot in the press lately about a new drug that's recently completed some clinical trials and has been fast-tracked by the Food and Drug Administration. The drug is called Aduhelm, and what it does is it attacks the amyloid plaques that are believed to be involved in the brain behind the Alzheimer's disease. And in clinical trials, they have found that it can decrease the decline of memory and problem-solving abilities over the course of 78 weeks in this test by about 25 to 28%. It's not a cure for Alzheimer's disease. They're not even sure that it really addresses the actual cause for Alzheimer's, which is still up for debate, but it does something. And it has been approved by the FDA, which means that it can be paid for by government healthcare programs. And this drug, Stephen Green, costs $56,000 per year per patient. There is an ongoing debate right now about how much is it worth to have somebody slow the decline of their mind? Are we willing to pay as a society, or in this case as a government funded by taxpayers, to reduce that decline or slow it down a little bit for $56,000 a year? Steve, who is up to these kinds of questions? Where are the godlike people who can answer these?
Yeah, we don't have godlike people. We have God and we're people. And I believe that is the division of labor as it's supposed to be understood. So I don't pretend to have answers here. I can tell you a personal story and maybe eke out a couple of numbers after I get done with the personal stuff. My great-grandmother I just adored. But the last real conversation I had with her, she addressed me by every male name that had ever been in use in the family except for Steve. And it was just absolutely heartbreaking. She was probably about 80 at that time, and she'd been in decline for several years, but she'd reached that acceleration point where it becomes unmistakable and undeniable. And as a family, we would have done anything to reverse some of that. She was Nana. As a society, though, I have to wonder where do we draw that line? We've got a $6 trillion budget floating around Capitol Hill that the White House is pushing. Spending this year, federal spending on healthcare, $1.5 trillion. With a more typical, $4.5 trillion budget. That is a significant amount of spending. It's absurd. It's obscene. It's not even mentioned anywhere in the Constitution. If I'm doing my math correctly, 3 days of federal health care spending would buy a nuclear-powered aircraft carrier. 4 or 5 days of federal health care spending is NASA's entire budget for the year, plus a significant amount of change. As a country, we're supposed to be doing some great things, and the reason we can't afford to do a lot of these great things is there is a unlimited appetite for healthcare spending and no ability on the part of Washington to say no, and it's going to bankrupt us. Now, as a family, that's a call we get to make, and we would have made for Nana. We would have all pitched in. As a family, though, do we have the right to tell all the other families in the country that they have to help my Nana? These aren't easy questions, Scott, but I do know that when your costs are removed from your decision-making, it becomes very easy to spend other people's money on your private pursuits.
And I think Steve has really nailed it there, Bill, as you also have personal experience with this struggle, this disease that so few, even of the brightest minds on the planet, understand. Certainly, as it affects our families, my grandmother had about a decade-long descent into dementia. We would do anything to recapture a little bit of her. if we could, or to slow down the decline a little bit if we could. Sell our cars, sell our houses, get rid of all our belongings, do whatever we could to do any little thing. But this is, what I'll call the sort of vanishing point argument. It's that argument that people make for every good cause, where they'll say, no matter what it costs, if one person could receive the benefits of this drug, wouldn't it be worth it? But what's the moral question, Bill, when it comes to saying, I want to take what affected my grandmother or your mom and say, I'm going to dip into somebody else's pocket, involuntarily removing their money in order to gain this little bit of a toehold into the personality that we see slipping away?
Yeah. For those people watching who don't know either one of these things, my mom's been basically gone for 10 years now. She's a tough bird, but she's still alive. But last time I saw her was a little over a year ago. I walked into the facility, into the room she was in. She looked up, and I had the feeling she recognized me for about a second or two. Just that flash, like, hey, it's Bill, and then gone, and then no idea who I was. And it's a particularly horrible disease because the person that you love is gone, but their body is still here. You don't get to grieve. You don't get to mourn them. You don't get closure on it. It's just this ongoing toothache that just never gets healed. I lost a cat that I loved very much just last Friday. And you have to deal with the same issue here too. So let's just deal with the financial issue for a second. When you're dealing with something like this, you're on a spectrum of value. There's no milestones here. There's no breakpoints. And the way to think of it is this. If there was a drug that cost 5 cents per dose and reduced Alzheimer's by 95%, we'd all be in favor of that. If there was a drug that costs $1 million per dose and reduced Alzheimer's by 2%, we'd have to be thinking seriously about it. If it was $20 million a dose and reduced it by 2%, then we'd say, well, clearly this is just not worth it. So here we are somewhere in this spectrum. And unfortunately, these numbers, 50 grand, 25%, are starting to get into that gray area where it almost seems like, well, money isn't money anymore anyway. What difference does it make? Let's just pile it on to the mountain. But the reason I mentioned my cat is this. There came a point, and anybody who's lost a pet or knows this, there comes a point when you have to make that call to the vet. And if you don't, then what's going to take 5 minutes is going to take 3 or 4 days while this animal just slowly dies under your bed. And there comes a point when you have to make that call. And usually the animals let you know when they're ready for that. But I had to make that decision on Friday.
I'm sorry.
And here's the heart of it, Scott. We all want one more day, right? We just want one more day. It doesn't matter about weeks or months. I know he's not going to last for months or weeks. I just want one more day, one more day, one more day. And at what point do you say, well, this is the day. There are no more one more days. What point does it become cowardice on your part and selfishness to want this one more day? And where I'm going with this is simply this. We have lived in a world of such wonder and miracle that the idea of dying is not only repulsive to us, it's alien to us. We can't accept it. We don't believe it. We think that given how rich we are and how smart we are, how powerful we are with our science and our medicine, that any amount of resources should be expended to get one more day. And I think the answer to this question is not how much does this dose cost and can we afford it? I think the answer to this question is for this entire country to start thinking about things like adults and start asking ourselves important questions like, what is one more day worth? Now, if we're talking about a treatment or a medicine or a procedure that prolongs life, that can take somebody who would normally would die in this situation, but the medicine will extend their life for 20, 30, 50 years, who knows? That's a different story. But with this, we're talking about slowing down a regression. There is no good exit from this particular disease. We're talking about delaying the inevitable. And we're not talking about a medicine. Look, This would be an entirely different argument if the argument was for $50,000 we can save a girl who's 8 years old who's dying of leukemia and she'll live to be 90. That is an entirely different argument. In this particular case, we have to accept the fact that there's got to be a price limit on what that one more day is going to cost us. And we will not be able to figure out what that dollar value is until we ask ourselves the moral question about who the hell do we think we are demanding one more day?
You know, if the federal government were not involved in this question at all, it would be a completely different issue. Because obviously anybody whose family has ever been touched by Alzheimer's or dementia, or so many of the terrible diseases that have ravaged people, the only question would be, where do we get the money? You know, what do we got to do so that we can get the money? And most people would be willing to sacrifice a lot in order to have some more lucid moments with grandma or mom or dad. Most people would be willing to give up a lot of their own personal comfort in order to increase the comfort of another. But that's not the question we're really dealing with here because of the entanglement of the federal government, as it is in so many other areas. It muddies the waters. And so now we have a question of what is it worth to make life a little more pleasant, not just for mom, but for the family. What is it worth to extend her lucidity a little bit, to slow the decline a little bit? And is the ability to front load this very expensive drug payment up front like this going to drive innovation that will eventually drive the cost down and the efficacy up so that more and more people can have access to something that will eventually completely relieve the ravages of this disease or perhaps cure it? We don't know if that's in the future, but we've seen the trajectory of other kinds of ailments, and we've seen what human thought and the human determination have been able to do. I am quite hopeful that by spending $56,000 a year now to get 25% decline in the decline, so to speak, that in a couple of years it'll be $5,000 and 50%. And eventually it will be something that you can go into a drugstore and take as a preventative measure so that people never have to deal with this kind of a problem again. If your family's going through that right now, our hearts go out to you. Bill and Steve and I in various ways have all come in contact with this. And this is where the rubber meets the road when you're opining on government and philosophy and economy and capitalism and free markets. When it comes right down to it, it was my nan, Bill's mom. It was, Steve's grandparents. It was this situation that we have to deal with in a very tangible, emotional, palpable way. And when you get to that point, you realize that there are no conservatives and liberals and progressives. There are people, and there is suffering, and there is love, and we're all in it together. For Bill Whittle and Stephen Green, I'm Scott Ott. Thanks to the members at BillWhittle.com for making Right Angle possible.